So good day everyone. For today's topic, we're about to discuss about Pavlovian conditioning or the classical conditioning. So before we go through about Pavlovian conditioning, let's talk about what leads to Pavlovian conditioning or the classical conditioning. And it is the behaviorism theory. In the parlance of psychology, behaviorism is concerned with the behavioral changes in the role of the environment on these changes. So it is a theory of learning which states all behaviors are learned through a process called conditioning. Thus, behavior is simply a response to environmental stimuli. Behaviorists claim that nurture is crucial in the process of acquiring knowledge. Is it true that nurturing a specific person or an animal is crucial because it takes time, the process itself in injecting your informations to that specific person or an animal? For example, teaching an animal on how to pitch the ball or etc. Just like that. John B. Watson is a popularized or famous on the theory of behaviorism. His full name is John Broadus Watson, was an American psychologist who popularized the scientific theory of behaviorism. He writes, the ultimate goal of behaviorism is to derive laws to explain the relationships existing among antecedent condition, the stimuli, which connect to the two linked behavior or the responses. The following conditions rewards, punishment, or neutral effects. So these conditions will vary on how you inject your informations to that specific animal or a person, whether you're doing good, so there is a reward. If you do punishments to that, so it causes bad reaction to the animal or the person. Or there is also neutral effects which leads to no reaction. Next, Ivan Pavlov, 1849 to 1936. Ivan Pavlovich Pavlov was a Russian psychologist known primarily for his work in classical conditioning. So, Ivan Pavlov discovered classical conditioning. In 1904, he won the Nobel Prize for his outstanding studies on the psychology of digestion. Ivan Pavlov studied the digestion process of the dog, and he discovered that the dog naturally salivates to food. So, si Pavlov, he accidentally noticed that, di ba si Pavlov is studying about the digestion or the digestive process of the dog, and he noticed that the dog naturally salivates to food. So this is, he think that what if he think about other tool to salivate the dog. So now let's talk deeper about Pavlov classical conditioning or the Pavlovian conditioning. Classical conditioning, also known as the Pavlovian conditioning, is learning through association and was discovered by Pavlov, a Russian psychologist. In simple terms, two stimuli are linked together to produce a new learned response in a person or an animal. So, first, stimulus evokes a natural response by a subject while the second doesn't, but after enough pairings together, the second becomes conditioned and causes the response to happen. According to my research, he puts a surgical device to a dog's mouth so he can measure the saliva of it. But after by experiment, he noticed that before the food was even presented, the dog begins to salivate. The dog salivate on the researcher's footstep or even just the bowl itself. So just imagine the footstep and the bowl makes the dog drooling. Therefore, na classically conditioned na yung dog that every time na may footstep and my bowl, it means to him na may food for him. So after Pavlov filled this out, he himself think that what if I could classically condition a dog to salivate with the use of a bell? Diba? Kisa gunang tao nga mag-isip ng palawayon nimong aso gamit lang ang bell, di ba? So as you notice the picture, the dog salivate or have drooling response if he see a food. So ganyan naman talagang mga aso, di ba? If whether they see food, they salivate. So the food there is the unconditioned stimulus, and the dog drooling's response is the unconditioned response. So the second picture, there is no drooling response since there is no food. How could the dog drool or salivate without a food, diba? So it means that this process is neutral because neutral stimulus, because the dog don't even salivate on that because it is a bell, it is not a food, right? So the third picture, Pavlov sound the bell with food over and over again. So he experimented, niring niya yung bell with food many times. After the number of experiment, he just ring the bell and the dog was salivated, and he finally classically conditioned the dog to salivate with the use of the bell. So after many times na nagri-ring siya ng bell with food, na-condition na yung aso na every time nire-ring niya yung bell, meron yung food. Therefore, he classically conditioned the dog with the use of the bell. And it is another learning for the dog. So, to sum it up, classical conditioning is a process in which you are trying to use another stimulus but aiming to have the same response or reaction to the specific person or an animal. So that's all about classical conditioning by Pavlov. Hope you learned something, and thank you guys for listening and watching.
About other phenomenon in classical conditioning. So when we say phenomenon, it is something that is observable or an extraordinary thing or a person. According to BOTW and Morley of 2004, when the CS is repeatedly unreinforced, that is without the UCS, the CR will eventually diminish in intensity and effect. So in classical conditioning, when a conditioned stimulus is presented alone without an unconditioned stimulus, the conditioned response will eventually cease. So this phenomenon is called extinction. So extinction is a behavioral phenomenon observed in both apparently conditioned and classically conditioned behavior, which manifests itself by fading of non-reinforced condition response over time. So when the extinction of learning passes through time, the CR may still be restored. This is according to Robbins of 1990. This recovery after extinction phenomenon is termed as spontaneous recovery. So spontaneous recovery can be defined as the reappearance of the conditioned response after a rest period or period of lessened response. If the conditioned stimulus and unconditioned stimulus are no longer associated, extinction will occur very rapidly after a spontaneous recovery. So this means that extinction does not completely involve unlearning of the pairing. That's according to Redditch et al. Of 2018. Generalization is another phenomenon in Pavlovian classical conditioning. So, when the dog salivates by just merely hearing the buzzer, it is likely to elicit similar CS when it hears a faster or a slower beat of the buzzer or any device that quite similar sound. So, have you heard Pavlov's dog? That is the experiment conducted by Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov, wherein his dog started to salivate when he rang a bell. So that is the best known example of classical conditioning, when a neutral stimulus is paired with a conditioned response. So according to Harris of 2006, however, pointed out that the more different the new stimulus to the CS, the lesser generalization surfaces. So this is the figure of other phenomenon in Pavlovian's conditioning. So it includes discrimination, spontaneous recovery, generalization, and extinction. So that's all for other phenomenon of Pavlovian's conditioning. Thank you.
Our topic is all about Watsonian conditioning, and his full name is John Brutus Watson, 1878 to 1958. John B. Watson, he is the founder of behaviorism. He took Pavlov's idea and put them to new and more rigorous tests. The name of his experimentation is Little Albert and Generalization. Watson demonstrated that he could create fear in a child in a response to a neutral stimulus, a rat. Paired a rat with a fear-inducing stimulus, a loud noise, the child eventually became fearful to become stimuli or generalization. According to John Brutus Watson, 1878 to 1958, if Pavlov is successful in proving associationism between stimulus and response, people can also have such ability to associating certain feeling, behaviors, instances, and even symbols. The Little Albert Experiment. In 1920s, John B. Watson classically conditioned a human baby to experience fear at the sight of a white rat, and as a result of stimulus generalization, at the sight of other small furry animals. He achieved this by creating loud, painful noises whenever Albert touched the rat. Albert began to associate small animals with the trauma of the noise. Little Albert, the most popular conditioning experiment that Watson made. Sa before conditioning, si Baby Albert hindi siya takot sa white rat. Takot siya sa ingay na gawa nila ni Watson at ni Rainer, kaya siya umiyak. Sa during conditioning naman, they represent the white rat, but still they make a loud noise. That is why umiyak siya kasi natakot. Then after conditioning naman, rat na lang ang nirepresent nila, but still umiyak pa din si Baby Albert kasi nga natrauma na siya sa ingay na ginawa nila. Association theory according to Pavlov and Watson. Association are the stimulus, response, repetition, and behavioristic learning. So association, it refers to learning that occurs when a neutral stimulus or the white rat becomes associated with stimulus, the loud noise that naturally produce a behavior. After the association is learned, the previously neutral stimulus is sufficient to produce the behavior. So the stimulus are the loud noise and the white rat. The response is Baby Albert was crying because he was scared. And that's all. I hope you learned something in my report. Thank you.